Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our guest today is Jaime Casap, a higher education thought leader and evangelist who works with educational organizations around the world, helping them find ways to continuously improve the quality of education by utilizing and enabling technology. The roles he's played include being Google's global education evangelist, where he evangelized the power and potential of the web, technology, and Google tools as enabling and supporting capabilities in pursuit of creating powerful learning models. Jaime serves on multiple boards. He also serves as an advisor to dozens of organizations that are focused on education and access, including South by Southwest EDU and ASU's GSV advisors. Jaime joins us today to talk about the value of higher education, a subject he's passionate about given his background and where he came from, and how university presidents can and should be shifting the narrative from being defensive about higher ed to being proactive and talking about its value. Jaime, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Hey, this is going to be exciting for me because I know you are passionate about public policy and education, and you approach it from a very different perspective, growing up where you did in New York. Tell our listeners a little bit about that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I believe strongly that education is a silver bullet, that education levels the playing field, that education is what we focus on to move us forward. And it's a personal passion for me because I wouldn't be talking to you if it wasn't for education. I'm a first generation American, born and raised in Hell's Kitchen, New York, old school Hell's Kitchen, New York from the 70s and 80s when it wasn't the greatest place to be. Raised by a single mother who came to the United States from Argentina. I'm a first generation American, born and raised in Hell's Kitchen, grew up with a single mother, grew up in poverty, grew up on welfare and food stamps. So none of the best conditions that Dr. Spock would require for raising a child. And yet I'm able to sit here and talk to you, and it's because of education, right? Because education is a great equalizer if we get it right. And so I think that education has the potential to do that, and even more fun and exciting ways today than it did even when I was a kid, because it's easier, right? It's easier to have access to information. It's easier to collaborate. It's easier to take information and convert it into intelligence. And so I feel like we're wasting the opportunity that we have in front of us, both in K-12 and higher ed, and because we're still doing things in the old traditional way when the world has completely changed. And so my passion for education is personal in that way.
Well, and that makes perfect sense from what you've said. Now, take us a little bit on your path, from Hell's Kitchen to your undergraduate, and then your most recent thing besides your consulting has been the education evangelist at Google. So that's a very interesting path.
Yeah. So I grew up in Hell's Kitchen, and I would say that basketball was a big part of my life. It kept me on the straight line, if you will. You can't play ball unless you have a B average. And you obviously can't play high school basketball unless you're in high school. Right? So it becomes important to be able to do that.
Important safety tip, is that?
It's a tip, right? If you want to play high school basketball, you should probably stay in high school. So basketball was a big part of my life growing up. And so I played basketball, and I went to high school. I actually went to college to play basketball, ended up not playing, but that's a whole other story. And graduated from SUNY Brockport in upstate New York, decided that I wanted to keep studying, especially around public policy. My bachelor's was in political science and then communication applications. And I wanted to keep studying public policy because what I discovered in college is that the way we change things is through policy. Nothing gets changed unless there's a policy behind it, right? Unless there's a law. And that's true in anything, right? Even today, what gets measured gets done, and policy is all about measuring things. And so I wanted to study that. And so I went to graduate school. I went to Arizona State University and got my master's in public policy. But the story I tell in that transition was I remember going to my political science professors saying that I wanted to continue studying public policy. And one of my political science professors, a professor that was a mentor, someone that I took a lot of classes with, and he suggested and recommended that I apply to the Kennedy School at Harvard. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. Kids like me don't go to Harvard. Kids like me can't survive at Harvard. And I ended up not going to Harvard or applying to Harvard because I didn't think that I would be able to be successful there. And obviously since then, I know that that's not true. Harvard has paid me to speak at their institution. And so I think that, this idea of continuing your education, no matter what, and always focusing on your capacity and capability. And so for me, going from undergraduate to graduate school, where I continue to study public policy and I want to keep doing it, that transitioned into working. I started working for Governor Cuomo, the first Governor Cuomo, not the one that's in trouble today, but the first one. And I worked with him on public policy issues. And then he didn't get reelected. So I went over to a consulting company at Accenture, where the whole idea was that I was going to Accenture to focus on consulting in the public policy space. And that turned into working in technology, and that turned into working in high tech, and that turned into working at Charles Schwab for a couple of years, and that turned into working at Google for 15 years. And, all of that, when I talk to students, I tell them that it's not, there's an old Latino saying, which is, if you want to make God laugh, tell her your plans, right? It's this idea that it's about opportunities that get put in front of you and what you do with those opportunities, and building your reputation and building your skills. But through all of that, through the last 30 years, what I started with is still true, which is it's all about policy. And so whether it's technology, whether it's high tech, whether it's universities, whether it's K-12, it all goes back to policy. And unless we change policies, unless we focus on really bringing out the most effective and most efficient policies that impact the most disadvantaged students, we're never going to get anywhere. So that the work is the same in some weird way, no matter where I am, right? So whether I'm at Google for 15 years or I've been on my own for the past year, I'm still working on the same issues, which is let's change people's perception of what we need to focus on, and then let's create the policies that we need to put in place to make that happen. And that's true no matter what you do.
Thank you for that, because it puts it in good context for what the primary conversation is going to be today, is how do presidents shift that conversation? There's a lot of news out there right now about, there's less value for higher education and those type of things. And you're the poster child for why that's not true.
Right. Yeah. And even beyond that, this whole narrative of not everyone needs to go to college. Number one, it's usually said by someone who actually went to college, which is always ironic to me. And number two, it's not true. If you look at that sentence and define it as, not everyone needs to go to college, period. Yes, that sentence is true. But that doesn't mean that you don't need more education. And what's true today is that we need to constantly keep learning, that we constantly have to get better at what we do. We have to constantly reskill ourselves and rethink how we think about things and all the things that higher education provide. And so I think that the battle that college presidents are having right now is around what is the value proposition of higher education? And I don't think they've done a very good job talking about what that value proposition is. I think they get very defensive. I think they get very in the weeds around like, oh, you need a college degree for this job, or you need this or that. And that's not really what it is. I remember when I was in graduate school, I went to Arizona State University. I graduated with a degree, master's in public policy, and a focus on public policy. And I remember being in the computer room, right, in the lab. This is how old I am. I didn't have my own computer. And I remember being down in the lab, working on my last 60-page paper in WordPerfect 5.1, right? And sending my 60-page paper to a dot matrix printer. So I had a good 45 minutes to kill while I waited for that paper to be printed. And I remember thinking, my God, I'm done. I am done. I am done learning. And that wasn't true 100 years ago when I graduated. And it's even less true today. So the value proposition that you need a piece of paper, yeah, we can make that argument all day long that's not true anymore. But what isn't true is actually the opposite, which is not only do we not need a piece of paper, a piece of paper doesn't matter. What matters is the constant and consistent learning that needs to take place. I was in a debate with a New York Times reporter on Twitter a couple years ago, and he's like, what higher education institutions need to figure out is how do you cram the real or the most valuable information that they need for the next 40 years of their career. And I'm like, no, that's the problem. The problem is it's not about cramming 40 years into 4 years. It's about how do you teach for 40 years, right? How do you constantly evolve and teach? And so the value proposition has moved away from, we are an institution that can certify that you sat in class and you took tests, right? And that you took certain classes, to now saying we are committed to anyone who comes to our institution, to make them lifelong learners, to teach them how to learn, to teach them the skills that they need, what I call the human skills, right? Problem solving, critical thinking, collaboration, the ability to learn, creativity. We're going to teach them of those. We're going to create opportunities, and both live and simulation opportunities to build those skills and to keep building those skills. We're going to give them the opportunity to expand the way they think about things and to think about things from 10 different perspectives. We're going to do that. That's our job. That's what we're going to bring to you, employer or world. That's our value proposition. And to create real lifelong learners, and that we're never going to stop bugging them. Not about joining the alumni association or sending us money. We're never going to stop bugging them about building their learning. And so how do college presidents shift that value proposition to talk more about that, to talk more about what is the most critical thing, which is how do you build real lifelong learning in students and constantly go back to the well, if you will, to always learn, always pick up new skills. I spoke at The Ohio University a couple years ago, and I had walked across the campus. I got to the student union where this event was taking place. It was the 150th anniversary of the institution. And I had walked in, and the president of the university is there, and a couple of people from the president's team were there. And I walked up to them and I said, hey, I just walked across your campus. And their reaction was, oh, so what'd you think? And I said, whenever I do anything like that, especially at a select institution like The Ohio State University, and I want to point out to the fans of The Ohio State University that I said The Ohio State University.
Oh, I noticed.
Okay,
I noticed.
Good. I don't want hate mail. And I said, whenever I do anything like that, I am just unbelievably jealous. And I said, here I am, 50 years old. People that I'm talking to are probably around the same age, older, younger, but about that age. And I said, can you imagine right now in our life having 4 years to do what we want, to focus on learning what we want, to focus on interacting with experts from all over the world in different disciplines, to collaborating with people from various backgrounds and who bring different perspectives. Like, I am so unbelievably jealous, right, of the students that are walking on that campus. What's the saying? Youthfulness is wasted on the young. I believe education is wasted on the young. Can you imagine taking a 4-year break in your 50s and going and doing that? So we can rethink the whole model of what learning is and the value proposition of higher education, which is really about helping students define who they are, what they're passionate about, and then peppering them with so much knowledge from so many different disciplines, from experts from all over the world, to collaborate with students from all over the world. I mean, that's the value proposition, and to do it for the rest of their lives. I think that's what's missing in the whole thing.
Yeah. No, and I think you're spot on with this. So we're really thinking about it's not so much 4 years of learning. Is the purpose of higher education is to create lifelong learners, to create a curiosity in students.
Right.
And then in that time when they're on campus, to help them to explore who they really are.
So one of the things that I get quoted on all the time is this idea that I've been talking about for 10 years, which is that it is no longer fruitful to ask students what they want to be when they grow up, to ask anybody what they want to be when they grow up, because that's an old world question, right? We have to understand and realize that we are now living in a digitalized economy. And by digitalization, I mean everything. I mean computer science, artificial intelligence, machine learning, AR, VR, automation, robotics, blockchain, you name it. And what we don't understand, because I see it every day, and I see articles about Zoom fatigue and is too much technology. Do we have too much technology in our lives? And I giggle whenever I see things like that, because what most people don't understand is that we are literally at the very, 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 very beginning of this. We are cavemen and women when it comes to technology. And what I mean by that is, think about it this way. Quantum computing, which most people know nothing about, but right before I left Google had a breakthrough in quantum computing. And I'm not going to get into defining the whole thing because you've just lost a bunch of listeners if I start getting into that. But I'll talk about it this way, which is if you took one of those mathematical formulas or equations that spin forever, right? Like 1 + 1 + 1, and you try to get to the end of the equation. And by the way, just as a side note, my daughter, my 6-year-old,
she solved this problem? Is that
no, a couple months ago, she was playing in her room. And I said, okay, come on, we're done. We got to go take a bath. And she's like, ugh, why do things have to end? Why do good things have to end, right? And I go, well, everything ends. Everything has to have an ending. And she looked at me dead face without even thinking about it. And she goes, no, that's not true. Numbers don't end. So, that's my 6-year-old. But and she was right. And it changed
Is she a Google prodigy?
She changed my perception of the world. But so you take one of those mathematical formulas and you feed it to the world's most powerful supercomputer. It would take that supercomputer 10,000 years to process that equation. The breakthrough that Google had was they did it in 200 seconds. Right? So 10,000 years versus 200 seconds. Now, they didn't do that on a Chromebook or a MacBook Pro or on their iPhone. They did that in a quantum computing lab, this massive thing that, is the size of the old IBM computers from the 1950s. But we're not that far away from that. Another way of thinking about it is that Google's quantum computer, and this is the last figure I had, but Google's quantum computer in 2019, in technology years, 2019 was like 27 years ago. But in 2019, Google's quantum computer was, and this is a hard number to grasp, was 168 million times faster than the world's most powerful supercomputer. 168 million times faster. Another way of thinking about it is look at your latest and greatest phone or your latest and greatest laptop or your latest and greatest whatever technology and realize that whatever it is that you're holding in your hand is 168 million times slower than what's coming.
So what you're telling me is that this phone, based on quantum computing, makes the call before you even think about making the call.
It's incomprehensible. You can't understand what it's going to do. And so like I'm having conversations with people in my network, like he used to be the chief innovation officer at NASA, and now he's the chief technology integration specialist for NASA for Mars. As if, like he's got to make sure the Wi-Fi works well on Mars. But we're having conversations about not, flying from Phoenix to New York, not making that time go faster by building lighter planes or making better fuel efficiency or anything. Like we're literally talking about getting from Phoenix to New York, which today takes about 5 hours, depending on wind, to do it in 15 minutes. Because you're going to go straight up and straight back down, right? And so like we're not even comprehending what's coming or what's possible. And so this idea that we're asking students what you want to be when you grow up, like that job's going to be here, or that machinery is not going to take over that job, or that we're going to constantly be looking for ways to improve, it doesn't make any sense. So what I ask students instead is, what problem do you want to solve? What's the problem that spins in your head? And it doesn't have to be a social problem. It could be anything. It could be making better cars, making better microphones. It could be making anything. My oldest daughter, the problem that she's solving is telling better stories through video, right? So it doesn't have to be a social problem. But can you imagine? So that's the first question. The second question is, how do you want to solve that problem? How do you want to take your gifts, your talents, your experiences and solve that problem? And that's an important question, because if a student comes to you as an advisor and says, I want to solve climate change, let's say it is a social problem, and let's say they're passionate about climate change, they want to solve climate change. You might say to them, climate change, you need to go be a scientist, you need to go study STEM, you need to go get a degree from a university in global sustainable development or environmental science. Sure, there's a million ways to solve a problem with those degrees and through that track. But what if that student is a talented photographer? What if they're an amazing writer? What if they are an unbelievable educator, that they were just a born education leader? The way they can solve climate change is by going out and documenting climate change, by going out and writing about climate change, by going out and creating an educational experiential program about climate change. The point is that there are millions of ways to solve a problem. How you want to solve that problem matters. And I can tell you for a fact, because I have 3 kids, that a 19-year-old has no idea who they are and what they're good at, right? And then the third question is, what do you need to know to solve that problem? What are the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that you need to have to solve that problem? And that's where education comes in. And so can you imagine, and this is what I work on with universities, is to get them to a point where they're brave enough, where on their homepage, right at the beginning, right when a student says, do I want to go to this state university, right? Whatever university. And right on the front page, it says, what problem do you want to solve? Come here. We're going to figure out who you are, and we're going to help you solve that problem. How do you not go to that university? I want to go to that university, right? And so that's where we need to focus. That's the value proposition that higher education can bring. And I have great stories about my kids saying, I want to be X, and without understanding, because you said it, right? It's helping students understand who they are and what they're good at, helping them really find who they are and where their skills and passions are.
So what I'm hearing you say is a fundamental shift in the way that undergraduate education is done. It's giving them the knowledge, giving them the 4 years to learn who they are, building their human skills, and then figuring out what their passion is and giving them the passion, for lack of a better word, to be lifelong learners, to continue to learn about their subject matter. Because the subject matter is going to change.
Right. Right. So, my daughter, Kate, my oldest, there's not one parent that I tell the story to who believes me, but, so I actually, both her and I were interviewed for a book that's coming out soon. So it's written down somewhere. But my oldest daughter came to me and said, she was at ASU and she says, I think I'm going to be a business major. And I said, business major? I'm curious about that. Why business major? She goes, well, because everything that I'm passionate about, I see the things that I'm good at and the things that I really want to do. I see that there's jobs in marketing that I can do that in. So she was very practical. She was looking for, and I was taken aback by this idea of her being a business major or a marketing major, because this kid had been making movies on any device that she could find since she was 5 years old. Wow. And so I said, nope, not paying for that. And this is the part where parents don't believe me, right? I said, no, if you are an art major, if you are a film major, I will pay for that. And she did. And she has a degree in film production. And she's an editor she works for Courageous Studios, which is part of CNN. She makes fake news. She makes some of the best fake news you can find. And And she's a badass editor, and she does amazing work, and she's sought after by everyone, right? Like, she's really good at what she does, because I knew this about her at a very early age, that she's a storyteller, that she's really good at this. She's really good at editing. She's really good at putting emotion into video, which is a very hard thing to do. And she's really, really good at it. And so she does that. Now, my 20-year-old came to me last year when he was at ASU, and he said, I think I'm going to be a political science major. And I said, political science? You don't even know who the governor is. No, you're not going to be a political science major, because this kid has had access to the governor, to, the mayor of Phoenix has been at my pool parties, right? I know both senators. I know all the congressmen, and women. He has been in my life. These people have been in my life, and I've been part of their life for this whole time. And he's never once said, hey, can I go work on their campaign? Or, hey, can I go work in their office? Or, hey, can I do this? Never has showed any interest in political science. He was actually born to be an educator, and he just didn't know it. So even my kids at 18, 19, 20 years old have no idea what they're good at. And so to your point, let's start there. That's the first value proposition for higher education is, let's figure out who you are, what you're good at, what you like, what you don't like. And I can't tell you how I think about this every day. I wish somebody would have done that with me when I was 18, 19, 20 years old, because I would have discovered a long time ago that I'm just never going to be good with Excel spreadsheets. It's just never going to be a thing for me, that I'm always going to have to hire that out. And other things like that. And so helping students identify who they are and what they're good at and where their talents and where their passions are, and helping them define those, and then giving them the opportunities to build those skills and to continue to refine them and provide that expertise that's out there. That's the real value proposition. One of the real value propositions that higher education can bring to students. And to your point, it has to be ongoing forever. So when I went to Dr. Crow at ASU, who's a mentor, genius, and a friend of mine, I said to him a couple years ago, I said, hey, why did you abandon my daughter? And he laughed, and he's like, okay, I'll bite. What do you want? I said, she graduated from ASU. At this point, she had graduated from ASU 2 years ago. And I said, she hasn't heard from you since. Look, she gets the Alumni Association emails. She gets the, get the Visa card emails, or she gets the, hey, are you making enough money to send us half your money emails? But why isn't she getting an email that says, hey, Elaine, what are you doing? A year after she graduates. And Elaine being able to say, oh, you're working at, in video production at CNN. Well, I just scanned, and I'm talking about machine learning here. I just scanned your transcript, and you took a lot of video production classes while you were here. There's been obviously a lot of updates to those classes. Would you like to take a refresher course? Oh, you're working at CNN. I scanned your transcript. You didn't take any journalism classes. Would you like to take a journalism class? By the way, there's 12 other people who also live in New York who are also interested in taking a leadership class on either public policy or journalism. Would you like to form a learning community, and we'll find you a learning facilitator? The point to him was, this is a person who has spent 4 years, or in her case, 4.5 years, investing all her time and energy in you. Why isn't everything that she wants to learn for the rest of her life not starting at asu.edu? And to his credit, Ed Plus was born, and they're off doing that kind of work now, 3 or 4 years later, right? And I don't mean just classes. If my kid wanted to learn how to fly drones, why isn't she going to asu.edu first? Because ASU has partnerships with other people who provide drone expertise flying lessons, and that's the connection, that they get to vet what good learning looks like, that my daughter trusts. There's so much opportunity to kind of create that value for students for the rest of their lives is absolutely critical. Higher education does an amazing job and spends a lot of money trying to recruit you to come to their institution, and then they keep you there for 4 years, and then they wave at you as you go out the back door, and then they never talk to you again. It's just insanity.
Except for money.
Except for money, right? Which is insane.
Yeah. So how do we need to change the enrollment and advising processes so that students are attracted to that lifelong passion?
Well, to your point, I think the value proposition has always been, come here and get a piece of paper so you go get a job, right? So when we stop that, And that's where the people who say you don't need a college degree, they're correct. Okay, at some point, we should all admit it might take more or less a different number than 120 credits to graduate with a sociology degree, and also, coincidentally, 120 credits to graduate with a computer science degree. Somehow, that just doesn't seem real, and I think we're on to that. And so...
You mean Carnegie needs to die? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think anybody needs to die. I just think that it's the opportunity to think about what learning looks like. And also, here's the other thing, right? Which is, imagine, college is expensive, and sometimes it should be. Depends on what you're buying. But can you imagine? Let's say take a 4-year, $50,000 college degree, and I'm just making up numbers. Not a year, and I know those exist too, but just overall, $50,000, 4 years degree. Imagine instead it's $80,000, because now it's over the course of your lifetime, not just for 4 years, right? And so there's so many different ways to think about how we take the value of higher education and spread it out over the course of a lifetime to build almost a subscription model where students are constantly going back and getting their education and constantly reskilling and constantly getting better at what they do, because that's the world that we currently live in now, is that we kind of constantly relearn and redo things. And by the way, this is a mental model, right? Like, this is the other thing that I often talk about in my presentations and when I talk to education institutions, right? This idea that adults with college degrees say to me all the time, like, hey, you're very creative. I'm not very creative. Or they'll say, I talk to educators all the time who say, I'm just not good with technology. I'm just not tech savvy. And my response back to these adults with college degrees, and this is why I don't have a lot of friends, my response is, no, you have chosen not to be creative. You have chosen not to be good with technology. Because everything that you need to be good at it is out there for you. It's a matter of choice of whether you, and that's okay too, right? It's okay to say that. Like, so for example, I don't say I'm a bad cook. I say I've chosen not to be a good one. And there's a huge difference between that idea, right? Like, could I be a good cook? Absolutely. Could I be a 5-star Michelin chef? Probably not. Because I don't want to put that effort into it. I don't even want to put an effort into being a good cook. I want to put an effort in to be able to eat so I don't die from starvation when I'm alone, right? Like, that's all I want. And for me, that's a choice. I don't want to be a good cook. I want to be a good enough cook to survive. Other people want to be good cooks. And so that's what they chose. I actually want to be a good photographer. Right? I don't say I'm a bad photographer. I say I continuously learn to be a good photographer. I spent this past weekend, learning how to shoot lightning storms, which is something I've never done before. And I got these amazing images of lightning storms now, right? So this idea that all the information is out there for you to learn, and what higher education can do is help you. I mean, think about it, right? What higher education can say to a student is, we have expertise. There's so much information out there that what we're good at is curate all of that information to take out all the noise and give you the most essential, the most important things that you need to know. And then we'll be able to help you do that, right? So it's this self-serving ecosystem, right? Where I don't know how to do something. Now I know what I need to know to learn how to do it. I can practice doing it. And then I know whether I'm good at it or not, and what I need to do to get better at it. And higher education institutions can help students through that learning process.
That is exactly right. That's a whole premise under lifelong learning. And you should be able to do that at your graduate institution. Though, when I say graduate, your undergraduate, where you graduated from and stuff. Right. ASU's got it right.
Yeah, look, when I started a YouTube channel a couple years ago, and I actually am filming a bunch of things because I kind of took a hiatus for a couple of months, but when I wanted to start a YouTube channel, and I wanted to learn how to do it myself, and I knew nothing. I'm a photographer. If you go to my Instagram channel, you'll see all my photography. I've always had a good camera. I just never knew I had a record button on it. And I went to my daughter, who, again, has a degree in film, and I said, hey, I want to start a YouTube channel. Where do I start? Like, what do I learn? And she said, after laughing for 20 minutes about me starting a YouTube channel, she said, you know, she said,
are good about that.
Yeah. She said, don't shoot in 4K. That's a lot of data. You can shoot in 1080, shoot at 24 frames per second, double your frame rate to 50, which is a whole other question. Keep your ISO at 100. And if you go outside, that's going to blow out your exposure. So you get a variable ND filter so you can manage the light that comes into your lens. Start there. And I said, cool, thank you. That's so helpful. All right, here's my next question. What the hell do any of those mean? Yeah, what the hell do any of those words mean? And then I learned. And then, you know, and this is a audio podcast, but you can see the quality of my film right now. And you go to my YouTube channel and you can see the quality of my filming. And I'm learning, and I constantly learn. And if you watch my first couple of videos, they look like hostage videos. And then the last couple of videos look better. And I'm getting better and better and better at it. And so this idea is that it's not that I'm not a videographer and that I'm not a video editor, is that I'm learning to be one. And all the information to be a good one is out there. I just have to be able to go know where it is, know what the good stuff is, be able to practice it, and then be able to get feedback on whether or not I'm doing it well. And that's the value that higher education can bring to students.
I think you've nailed it. The one piece with that is the passion. And you have the passion around higher ed. You have the passion around the photography and stuff like that. And that is an intangible that everyone has to find. Where is their passion? Just like what you said.
Absolutely. That's absolutely essential to everything.
Yeah. And so as much as I'd love to continue the conversation, it's fascinating. We're getting to the end of our time. So Jaime, 3 takeaways for university presidents on what they need to do to shift the conversation.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good, well, I was going to say the first thing that popped in my head is call me, but that's a whole other problem. The first is to understand the need that's out there. And the need is for students to create original thought, for students to create ideas and solutions to some of the biggest problems. And so how could we help students identify what those needs are? How can we help students identify who they are? So the first takeaway is helping students identify who they are and what they're good at and what they want to be good at. Second is this idea that the learning environment is no longer an institution and that it takes place over 4 years, that it's a lifelong thing, that they need to create models that support that. And then the third thing is this idea of just thinking outside the normal realm of things, right? This idea that higher education is a professor in a classroom with 50 students and they're all learning at the same time, when reality is learning happens in so many different ways, in different formats, in different fashions. Instead of thinking of a class being a group of students in a building somewhere, that you can think about 30 students from all over the world working with a professor that you've actually have never met, but they go through your institution. So to rethink everything that we know about learning and to get us to a point where, you know, circling back to this idea that we understand that we are at the very, very, very beginning of this next phase. I am not someone who says that education is broken. I'm not someone who says that education is not working. I'm someone who says that the world has dramatically changed and that what we need to do is recognize that and shift to it, because that's what we need to solve some of the biggest problems that we face.
Thank you. Great advice. What's next for you?
Just as a shout out to one of the organizations that I'm working with Grand Valley State University, which is how we got connected here. And we just launched this initiative called Rep 4, where we are creating solutions, but it's not a bunch of people in a think tank coming up with these solutions. We partnered through 6 universities to create student-led ideas. So students are driving solutions around how do we increase equity and access in higher education? How do we increase better learning opportunities for students who are disadvantaged, like I was when I grew up? And it's not us in some ivory tower coming up with solutions, is that the students are doing it on the ground. And they're coming up with some amazing solutions. So it's following up on that kind of work and working with higher education institutions to create that value propositions for students like me. Because at the end of the day, I don't get to meet a lot of people with my background in positions of influence and power. And what I'm trying to do, and the problem I'm trying to solve, is to put more people like me in positions of influence and power so that we can really impact and change the way things are done. So that, to your point around policy, so that we can start shifting some of these policies, so that we can really start taking advantage of the technology that's out there and all the solutions that are out there to bring life and bring solutions to these students who need it the most.
Very good. Well, Jaime, thank you so much for being a guest. It's a very great conversation. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
My pleasure. Take care, sir.
All right, bye.
Thanks for listening, and a special thank you to Jaime Casap and for his sharing his thoughts on the value of higher ed and how presidents can start shifting the narrative on why higher education is important. Our next guest is Matt Skogen, president of Hope College. Matt will be joining us to talk about Hope Forward, a new initiative designed to provide free tuition for students at Hope using a pay-it-forward model.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.